4.6, here we go. Represent subtraction of tenths and hundredths. So this time we're thinking about subtracting tenths from hundredths and hundredths from tenths. Now I just want to make sure you realize if you start with tenths and take away hundredths, you have to make sure to write it really carefully. If you're going to just do it the traditional way and line up your decimals, you're going to need to add zeros. And I'll show you that, but I just want to make sure to say it first off because it can be one thing that's a little tricky with subtraction. So anyway, how can you compare the lengths of the insects? That's something we might use subtraction for. If I want to say how much longer is this than this or this than this, we're going to subtract to do that. So what equation can we use to find out how much longer the ant is than the aphid? I'm sorry if you don't like bugs. So the ant is 64 hundredths centimeters. The aphid is 300 centimeters. So if I'm considering how I compare them, I can start with the ant and subtract the aphid. And that equals how much longer it is. That equals the difference. So in your notes, you can go ahead and say we can use decimal grids or a decimal grid. Whoa, I'm throwing my stuff over here. We can use a decimal grid just like we did before, but this time, like with addition, when I'm putting tenths on, sometimes I'll have to convert them into hundredths. So 64 hundredths is pretty straightforward. Go ahead and draw this on your paper while they mark it as well, how I would do 64 hundredths. 6 rows, and then 4 more little pieces, just like we've been doing in the other lessons. 64 squares. Now, we could draw x's just like we did before, but think, okay, if I'm subtracting 3/10, what am I subtracting? Am I just xing 3 boxes? Let's see. No, I'm subtracting 3 whole lines. So go ahead, x off 3 whole lines, and then write on your paper even 64 hundredths minus 3/10 to make a note in case you look back at it. Because remember, 3/10 is the same as 30 hundredths. So we're actually marking off 30 little boxes, not 3. 30 shaded squares is how many or more we're marking off. So what's the difference? We can see what we have left. I have 3 whole rows left plus 4 more, so that's 34. 34 hundredths. If I wrote it, so traditionally I'm going to write it vertically. If I use the more traditional algorithm, lined up my decimals. Notice I end up with that blank space. That's okay. But with subtraction, I need to write a 0. This one I technically don't have to, but if it's on top, you do. So it's a good habit to get into. 4, 3, decimal, and 0. All right, so either way, I get the same answer. So how much longer is the ant than the aphid? 34 hundredths of a centimeter. Now, if we are going to compare the beetle and the ladybug, how much longer is the beetle than the ladybug? Just like before, how much longer means we're subtracting. So we do 7/10 minus 43 hundredths. This is that tricky thing I warned you about. Now, if we use a decimal grid, it's not that much different. We just have to make sure we're thinking, okay, how do I represent 7/10 on my decimal grid? Well, we know that 7/10 is how many hundredths? 70 hundredths. So I would have to make sure to color in 70 little boxes or 7 whole rows. As they do it on here, make sure you do it on your notes. Perfect. So make sure you have that. This would be a good idea to write down as well. Again, so if you look back, you can remember what you were representing. So then, how would we X out 43? Same as before, we would just count that many, X amount. It might feel repetitive, but sometimes we got to be repetitive to get it in our brains. So I X'd off 40 or 4 rows and then 3 more, 43 boxes. And then we're left with the difference. So I have 2 full rows plus 7 more. I knew it was 7 because we had X'd off 3 and 3 plus 7 is 10. In case you're wondering how I counted so fast. So 27 hundredths. Now if I did this one in the standard way, I still have to line up my decimals. You might be thinking, why does 7 go on top? It's smaller. But remember, it's 7/10, which is bigger than 43 hundredths. This is where I need to write that 0 because I can't take 3 away from 0, so I need to borrow or regroup. If I don't write that 0, it's easy to just accidentally write the 3 and then you'll get it wrong. Because if I do it correctly, 10 minus 3 is 7, and there. Okay, so that matches the picture we got. If you do it any other sort of way, it's not going to match the picture. And it's because, like, think, this row I sort of had to convert into tenths or hundredths. So instead of having my 7 full rows, I had to turn 1 into hundredths so I could take away 3, and then I did just do 6 rows minus 4 rows, essentially. It's kind of how the picture matches. If that makes sense. So it's 27 hundredths centimeter longer than the ladybug. So remember, sometimes we have to convert tenths to hundredths. We can use a decimal grid to help us. Okay? If you want to just do it sort of the traditional way, write it down, make sure you line up that decimal, make them the same length by adding zeros, and then you just subtract like normal. But that lining up the decimals is important, so I'm subtracting tenths from tenths, hundredths from hundredths, etc. All right, first one, 54 hundredths minus 1/10. Go ahead and write it on your paper and then choose the right answer. All right, hopefully you got it. Now, if I wanted to, I could color it in 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm subtracting 1/10. So I'm going to cross off 1/10, leaving me with 1, 2, 3, 40. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 44 hundredths. Just so you can see what that looks like. All right, go ahead and find 9/10 minus 2 hundredths. All right, hopefully you didn't say 7 of any sort, because if I remember, 9/10 is 9 whole rows. Right, all those, 90 hundredths. And then I'm just crossing out. Oopsies. Sorry, I think I clicked on something weird. There we go. I actually made it really light. All right, so now I'm subtracting 2 of those little hundredths, but look how many I still have. Way more than 7. I still have 8 full rows and 8 little boxes. Whoa, that's a weird 8. There you go. So 88 hundredths. If you did it just by hand, sort of the traditional way, which I know some of you like, and that is fine, but I want to make sure you're doing it right. Or we put that 0, then I have to borrow. 10 minus 2 is 8, and 8. Remember, a lot of the reasons I point these out is because I've seen 5th graders over the years make a lot of the same mistakes. So I'm trying to make sure you are not one of those. All right, again, if you want to see it typed, that's what it looks like types. All right, we'll do a couple more. 1 7 hundredths minus 3/10. Go ahead and fill it out on your paper and then choose the right answer. And the reason I say fill it out on your paper is because it's really easy to accidentally not subtract the right thing from the right thing, and then you end up with wrong answers. So that's why I recommend you write it down, even if you do it the standard way. I'm just going to remind you what it would look like. That's the 1 whole. Then I have my 7/10, or 7/100, excuse me. And now I'm going to subtract the 3/10, which is that 3 over there that I'm crossing out. So now I have 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7/10 and 7/100. So I'd have 77/100. Or if you wrote it down the standard way, write it, I have to line up my decimal, put that 0, 7 minus 0 is 7, 0 minus 3 I cannot do, so I borrow, that becomes 10, 10 minus 3 is 7, 0 minus 0 is 0, bring down my decimal, and I get 77/100 either way. We'll leave it there. If you want more examples, I'm happy to show you, but go ahead and give your practice a try.